My daughter-in-law said I was just extra mouths to feed. And then she sold my room. That's how this nightmare started, honey. But listen close, because 1 month later, she was the one pounding at my door, crying for mercy. If you're watching this, subscribe and tell me where you're watching from. Because what you're about to hear has more twists than a pretzel factory. And I promise you, by the end, you'll know exactly how the pawn became the queen. It was a Thursday morning in late spring. I was sitting in the kitchen of the house Robert and I built brick by brick 40 years of mortgage payments, leaky pipes, and Sunday pancakes. The walls carried his laughter. The floor creaked where he always Saturday. To me, the house was alive. And then my daughter-in-law, Victoria, waltzed in wearing yoga pants that probably cost more than my entire wardrobe. She didn't even look me in the eye when she said it. You know, Margaret, times are tough. Kevin and I need more space for the baby. And honestly, you're just extra mouths to feed. I thought I misheard. My hearing's not what it used to be, but the cruelty in her tone was clear as a church bell. Extra mouths? I cooked every meal in that house. I folded their laundry. I even rocked that baby to sleep when they were too tired. But before I could answer, she shoved a glossy pamphlet into my hands. Golden Pines Retirement Community, the cover read, with smiling old people playing bingo. It felt like someone had just handed me my eviction notice wrapped in pastel colors. You'd be happier there, she said sweetly, sweet like spoiled milk. More people your age, activities. We've already spoken with them. There's a room available if you move out next week. Next week. Now, let me pause. I raised Kevin. I nursed him through measles, ironed his shirts for prom, and watched him swear vows to this woman in a white dress I paid for. And now she was telling me I was extra mouths to feed? I didn't argue. That's the trick, honey. When someone shows you their true face, you don't fight, you memorize. I gathered my things quietly. My Bible, Robert's pocket watch, the quilt my grandmother sewed, and I packed them in silence. But as I zipped up that worn suitcase, I made myself a promise. I would not die in Golden Pines. I would not fade into the wallpaper of a bingo hall. And I sure as sunrise would not let Victoria write the final chapter of my life. At 2:15 p.m. that same day, she called an Uber for me, didn't even drive me herself. Just stood in the doorway, arms crossed, belly swollen with the child she thought guaranteed her power in this family. Don't make this harder than it has to be, Margaret, she said. I looked at her then, really looked. And for the first time, I saw not a wife or mother, but a vulture in designer sneakers, circling the remains of what wasn't hers to claim. I didn't say goodbye. I didn't hug the baby. I just pulled that suitcase down the steps and slid into the back seat of a stranger's car. The driver glanced at me in the mirror. You moving somewhere new, ma'am? I swallowed the lump in my throat. Something like that. The motel she booked for me because, yes, she kindly prepaid. A week was called budget stay. The sign buzzed in neon, half the letters out. My room smelled like mildew and regret. The carpet had stains older than her marriage. But sitting on that sagging bed, I whispered to myself, 1 month, just 1 month. Let's see who's really feeding who. I know what you're thinking. Margaret, why didn't you call your son? Why didn't you fight back right there? Because, honey, sometimes silence is sharper than a sword. I wanted them comfortable. I wanted them sure they'd won. And I wanted the world to see the contrast when the tables turned. Pawn to queen. So that was the day my daughter-in-law tried to erase me from my own house. That was the day I went from wife and mother to just extra mouths to feed. But let me tell you something. When you push a woman who survived loss, raised a family, and buried a husband, you don't get rid of her. You forge her into steel. And 1 month later, Victoria would learn that the woman she shoved into a motel wasn't a burden. She was the storm coming for everything they thought they owned. Be honest, honey. If your own child's spouse told you you were just extra mouths to feed, what would you do? Would you walk away quietly, or would you start plotting your next move? Because me? I already knew my answer. And trust me, the story had only just begun. When people betray you, honey, it never starts with the big blow. It starts with cracks, tiny, hairline fractures in the glass. You think it's solid until the whole thing shatters. For months after Robert's funeral, I ignored the cracks. Maybe I wanted to. Maybe it was easier to believe Victoria's sweet smiles and soft words than face the truth. She made casseroles. She offered to drive me to church. She called me Mom in that sugary voice that always felt just a shade too polished. But grief fogs the mind, doesn't it? You reach for any kindness, even counterfeit kindness. One Sunday afternoon, about 3:10 p.m., I overheard her in the kitchen. She thought I was upstairs napping. "Kevin," she hissed, her voice sharper than broken glass. "This is ridiculous. We're grown adults with a child on the way, and we're still living with his mother? This is our house now. She's just lingering, like mildew, like clutter." Kevin muttered something about timing and respect. He never was good with conflict. "But Victoria," she pressed harder, "you promised me a home, not a museum filled with his father's old junk. I want that bedroom for the nursery. She can take her quilts and teacups somewhere else." My hands tightened around the banister. Every word drove a nail into my chest. Our house? No, honey. That house was bought with Robert's calloused hands and my frugal coupons. 40 years of sacrifice didn't turn to ours the moment she signed the marriage license. The mask slipped further at dinner a few nights later. It was 7:22 p.m., chicken still steaming on the table. Victoria barely touched her plate. Instead, she laid out pamphlets like playing cards, brochures for retirement homes, glossy photos of smiling old folks under captions like active living for seniors. "Margaret," she cooed, "Golden Pines has a pool, a book club, even art classes. You love art, don't you? You'd be so much happier there than rattling around this big house." I glanced at Kevin, waiting for him to step in, to say something, anything. He kept his head down, sawing his chicken into perfect squares. "I'm fine here," I said quietly. Victoria's smile froze, then cracked. "Mom, you don't understand. You'd be doing us a favor. Less stress for us, more fun for you." Her voice sharpened on us, like a knife pressing just a little too close. The final straw came the next week. I came back from church, hymns still humming in my ears, and found boxes stacked by the hallway closet. My closet. "What's all this?" I asked. Victoria didn't even flinch. "Oh, I'm just making space." The realtor said decluttering boosts property value. "We're thinking of putting the house on the market in a few months." "You know." For the baby. The realtor. The market. Words that had nothing to do with me. The woman who'd scrubbed those floors until her knees ached, who'd planted roses by the mailbox every spring. "Victoria," I whispered, "this is my home." She turned then, mask gone completely. No sweetness, no pretend warmth. Just cold eyes and a smirk that chilled me more than January wind. "Not anymore," she said. "Face it, Margaret, you're just extra mouths to feed, and you've been fed long enough." The words sliced clean through me. Extra mouths. A burden. I could have screamed. I could have begged. But instead, I smiled. It wasn't a happy smile. It was the kind of smile you give the undertaker when you realize he's digging his own grave instead of yours. "Is that so?" I asked. She tilted her head, victorious. "Yes, and the sooner you accept it, the easier this will be." Kevin finally looked up, eyes darting between us, like a boy caught in a storm he couldn't stop. He opened his mouth, then shut it again. Cowardice has a sound, honey, it's silence, when words are needed most. That night, lying awake in the room she'd already measured for a crib, I thought about Robert. He'd trusted Kevin to carry on his legacy. But legacies can be stolen when you hand them to weak men, married to greedy women. At 11:47 p.m., I whispered into the dark. "Not yet, Robert. They don't get away with this. Not while I still draw breath. So here's the truth, honey. Betrayal doesn't happen in one swing of the axe. It happens in whispers, in brochures, in boxes by the closet. It happens when the people you raise decide you're a burden instead of the backbone." And while Victoria thought she'd stripped off her mask to intimidate me, all she did was reveal her weak spot. Because once you see the vulture's wings, you know exactly where to aim the arrow. Tell me, if you were sitting in that chair, hearing your own child's spouse call you extra mouths to feed, would you have packed your bags right then? Or would you have smiled like I did because you knew the game had just begun? Because, honey, that night, I realized something important. Pawns don't stay pawns forever. Sometimes they cross the board. Sometimes they become queens. It happened on a Tuesday. Funny how betrayals love ordinary days. No anniversaries, no holidays, just a plain Tuesday when the world expects nothing. By 2:15 p.m., I was no longer a homeowner. By 4 p.m., I was standing outside a budget motel with 2 suitcases and $37 in my purse. Victoria didn't waste time. She arrived with Kevin like an eviction team, each carrying that smug authority of people who thought they were untouchable. Kevin held legal-looking papers. Victoria carried her cruelty like perfume strong enough to choke. "Margaret," she began, voice as syrupy as a poisoned cocktail. "We've made a decision. It's time for you to move out. For good." I blinked at her, standing in the living room where Robert and I had celebrated our 25th wedding anniversary, where I'd rocked Victoria's baby girl to sleep just last year. "Move out? This is my house." Her smile sharpened. "Correction. It was your house. According to the will, everything passed to me. Out of kindness, I let you stay. But kindness has limits." Kevin shuffled the papers, avoiding my eyes. Cowards always avoid your eyes when they're robbing you blind. They followed me upstairs, as if I might steal something from my own dresser. Victoria leaned against the doorframe while I folded 43 years of marriage into 2 worn suitcases. My hands shook over Robert's flannel shirts, his tie clips, the quilt my mother had sewn when we married. "You don't need all that junk," she said casually. "The senior complex on Maple Street provides linens." Linens. As if sheets could replace memories. At one point, I paused to cradle Robert's old pocket watch, the one he'd carried every day until the morning his heart betrayed him. Victoria rolled her eyes. "Really? That thing doesn't even work. Pack faster, we have a dinner reservation." A dinner reservation. They were evicting me on their way to steak and wine. By 3:12 p.m., Kevin was loading my suitcases into their shiny BMW. Victoria handed me $200 in cash, folded neatly like she was tipping a bellhop. "This should cover you for a few days while you settle in," she said, checking her watch. "Settle in where?" I asked. "There's a vacancy at Sunset Inn. Very affordable." Affordable. That word will never sound neutral to me again. The drive was silent except for the sound of my heart pounding against ribs that felt suddenly too thin to protect me. I stared out the window as my roses blurred past, as my mailbox disappeared from sight, as Kevin's polished shoes pressed the gas like he was burying me under asphalt. By 3:47 p.m., we pulled into the Sunset Inn's cracked parking lot. The sign flickered vacant Y because the C had burned out. Inside smelled of bleach trying and failing to cover mold. Kevin dropped my suitcases by the lobby desk like they were biohazard waste. Victoria gave me that pageant smile. "Good luck, Mom. Independence will be good for you." Independence. That's what they called abandonment now. The room was $49 a night. For that, I got peeling wallpaper, towels thinner than communion wafers, and a mattress that sagged like it had been carrying other people's heartbreaks for decades. The carpet smelled of old smoke and regret. At 4:22 p.m., I sat on the edge of the bed, holding the $200 Victoria had so graciously bestowed upon me. $200 against a lifetime of sacrifice. Against 43 years of cooking, cleaning, saving, bending, and breaking for a family that now considered me extra mouths. I thought I might cry, but the tears never came. Instead, a laugh bubbled up dry, sharp, almost manic, because, honey, the irony was too rich. My daughter-in-law had inherited millions and sent me to rot in a motel that cost less than her weekly manicure. But lying there that night, with the air conditioner rattling like an old smoker's cough, I felt something stronger than despair, a nagging memory. Robert. His obsession with paperwork, his meticulous files, his insistence on explaining the will to me years ago, making sure I understood. And I did understand. His will had not said this. He had promised me security, not exile. Robert may have been traditional, sometimes patronizing about men's business, but he was never cruel. He would not have left me destitute. That was when the doubt sprouted like a weed in concrete. What if Victoria lied? What if those papers Kevin flashed so quickly weren't the truth? By 11:03 p.m., the decision was made. Tomorrow, I'd use the motel's shaky Wi-Fi to find Robert's attorney, Harrison Fitzgerald. Distinguished, meticulous, and more importantly, not easily fooled. I lay back on that sagging mattress, staring at the stained ceiling tiles, and whispered to the dark, "Not yet. You won't bury me yet. Because here's the thing, honey. Exile isn't the end. Sometimes it's the beginning. Sometimes you have to be dragged out of your own home, humiliated with $200 in charity, and dumped in a motel that stinks of mildew to realize you're not beaten, you're being pushed to strike back. And Victoria? She thought she'd won. She thought she'd written me off with a motel receipt and a smile. But what she really did was light the fuse. So tell me, if your daughter-in-law threw you out with cash like a hotel tip, would you collapse in that motel bed? Or would you do what I did, lie awake, planning your next move, knowing that sometimes pawns don't stay pawns forever? Because, honey, I may have walked into Sunset Inn as a discarded widow, but I'd walk out ready to play queen. By 5 a.m. the next morning, I was on the number 14 bus headed downtown. The motel's coffee had tasted like burnt rubber, but it was fuel enough. My suitcase sat back in that depressing room, but I carried something more important with me: resolve. When betrayal knocks you flat, honey, the only way up is forward. And forward, for me, meant one man: Robert's lawyer, Harrison Fitzgerald. The office was on the 12th floor of a sandstone building that smelled of polished wood and old money. At 9:32 a.m., I walked through glass doors etched with his name. His secretary looked up, startled. "Mrs. Sullivan, we thought you were traveling." Traveling, that's the story Victoria had told them. My stomach tightened. "No," I said evenly. "I've been here all along, and I need to see Mr. Fitzgerald. Now." When Harrison stepped out, his face softened with genuine surprise. A tall man in his 70s with silver hair and wire-rimmed glasses, he carried himself like integrity in human form. "Margaret," he said, ushering me in. "I was wondering when you'd come. Your daughter said you were too distraught to attend the reading of the will. I've been concerned. Too distraught? Or too inconvenient?" "Harrison," I said, voice firm, "I never received an invitation. Victoria told me Robert left her everything. She handed me $200 cash and threw me out of my house." His eyes sharpened. "That's impossible." He walked to a tall cabinet, pulled out a thick file folder, and set it on his mahogany desk. My heart thudded as he slid the top document toward me. "Here," he said, "your husband's final will and testament, updated 6 months before his passing. Signed, witnessed, notarized." I recognized Robert's neat, controlled handwriting immediately. My breath caught. Harrison began to read aloud. "I, Robert James Sullivan, being of sound mind and body, do hereby bequeath to my beloved wife, Margaret Ann Sullivan, our primary residence at 847 Oakwood Drive, including all furnishings and personal effects. Additionally, I leave her 70% of all financial assets, investments, and accounts, totaling approximately $23 million. $23 million. 70%. My knees nearly buckled. He continued, his voice steady but edged with steel. "To my daughter, Victoria Sullivan Hayes. I leave $10 million to be held in trust, with distributions beginning on her 45th birthday, contingent upon her treatment of her mother, following my death." The room tilted. Contingent. He'd put conditions on her inheritance. Robert had known. He'd seen through her, even when I still clung to hope. I whispered. "She told me I inherited nothing, that everything was hers." Harrison's jaw tightened. "Then she lied. And not just lied, she committed fraud." I clutched the edge of his desk. "She evicted me, Harrison, from my own home. She said I was useless. She said I should find somewhere else to die." He exhaled slowly, the kind of breath men take before unsheathing a sword. "Margaret, what your daughter has done isn't just immoral, it's criminal. Elder abuse, forgery, possibly more. And now she's triggered the clause." "The clause?" "Yes, if she fails to treat you with respect and dignity, her trust reverts to you in full. Which means, my dear, you don't just inherit 70%, you inherit 100%. $33 million. Plus the house. Plus every asset she thought she controlled." I couldn't help it, I laughed. A sharp, almost wicked laugh that startled even me. "The irony," I said, "is so perfect it's almost poetic. She threw me out to seize her inheritance, and in doing so, she lost it all." Harrison allowed himself the ghost of a smile. "Indeed. Now, my dear, we call the police, we call the banks, and we freeze every account before she drains a dime further." By 11:15 a.m., Operation Justice, yes, that's what Harrison called it, was in motion. His assistant was on the phone with the bank. A detective had been contacted. Copies of the real will were being faxed to the courthouse. Every move was like pulling another thread from the tapestry of Victoria's lies. At 1:07 p.m., my phone buzzed. Victoria's name flashed across the screen. I glanced at Harrison. He nodded. Answer. Let her talk. Record if you can. I pressed accept. Mom, she snapped, her voice tight with panic. There's some kind of mistake. The bank froze all the accounts. They're saying Dad's assets are locked. What did you do? I smiled, my voice calm as still water. Hello, Victoria. I'm sitting in Harrison Fitzgerald's office. You remember him? Daddy's lawyer. The one who read the real will to an empty room while you told him I was traveling. Silence, then a strangled laugh. You don't know what you're talking about. Those documents, forged, fraudulent, and now in police custody. Sweetheart, you didn't just steal from me. You stole from yourself. That 10 million you thought was yours, it's mine now. Her breath caught. You wouldn't dare press charges against your own daughter. Watch me. I hung up, pulse racing, blood singing with something I hadn't felt in weeks. Power. For the first time since Robert's death, I wasn't the grieving widow exiled to a cheap motel. I was the woman holding all the cards. And honey, believe me when I say this, the game had just begun. By 2:45 p.m., Operation Justice was in full swing. Harrison's office hummed like a command center, phones ringing, faxes spitting out, his assistant firing off emails with the speed of a soldier reloading ammo. The banks had received copies of Robert's real will, signed and notarized. Every account Victoria thought she controlled was now locked tighter than Fort Knox. Harrison, I asked, watching his assistant dial yet another number. How long before she notices? He smiled thinly, adjusting his glasses. Oh my dear, she's probably noticing right now. At 3:17 p.m., the first confirmation came in. Wells Fargo, frozen. Merrill Lynch, frozen. Even the utilities she'd arrogantly transferred into her name, gas, water, electricity, were suspended pending verification of ownership. Each freeze was a nail hammered into Victoria's coffin of lies. And then, at exactly 3:47 p.m., my phone rang. Her name lit up again. Answer, Harrison said quietly. Let's see what she does when the ground disappears beneath her feet. I tapped the green button. Mom! Victoria's voice shrieked through the line, stripped of its fake sweetness. What the hell is happening? My credit card just got declined at the grocery store. Kevin's accounts are locked. The bank says you authorized this. Tell me it's a mistake. I leaned back in Harrison's leather chair, savoring the moment. Not a mistake, dear Justice. You can't do this. I already did. Your father's real will was read this morning. You were too busy lying about me being too distraught to attend. She tried to recover, her tone shifting from fury to manipulation in a heartbeat. Mom, you're confused. You're grieving. Someone's taking advantage of you. Think about the grandchildren. I cut her off. Think about how you threw your mother out of her own house with 2 suitcases and $200 in cash. Affordable, remember? That's the word you used. Well, affordable doesn't cover fraud charges. Harrison scribbled something on a legal pad and slid it across the desk toward me. Elder abuse, felony, mandatory restitution. I smiled as I read it. Victoria, I said slowly, what you've done is elder abuse, fraud, multiple felonies. Do you know what that means? On the other end, silence stretched. Then Kevin's voice cut in, low and tight. Margaret, let's be reasonable. Reasonable? I echoed. Kevin, you stood in my living room while your wife told me to find somewhere else to die. You carried my suitcases like they were trash bags. Reason left the building weeks ago. Harrison gestured for me to keep them talking. His assistant had Detective Rodriguez already patched in on another line, recording everything. Kevin tried again. We didn't mean for it to go this far. We'll transfer some money back, smooth things over. Let's handle this privately. Privately. I almost laughed. Sweetheart, you forged legal documents and staged an eviction. Privacy isn't on the menu anymore. The police are already involved. Victoria's voice returned, frantic. Mom, don't do this. You'll ruin us, Kevin's career, our reputation. You ruined yourselves the moment you decided I was expendable. And let me be very clear. You haven't just lost your inheritance. You've triggered the clause. Every dime your father left you now belongs to me. 33 million? Victoria. The house, the accounts, all of it, gone. There was a strangled sob. That's not fair. I straightened in the chair, my voice like steel. Fair? Fair? You threw your 70-year-old mother-in-law out of her home to make room for a nursery. You called me extra mouths to feed. Honey, the irony is so perfect it's almost poetic. Harrison chuckled softly. Beautifully said, he murmured. At 4:22 p.m., Detective Rodriguez walked into the office, badge glinting under the fluorescent lights. We've got enough to open a case, she said briskly. Forgery, elder abuse, financial fraud. They won't know what hit them. She sat across from me, sliding a recorder onto the desk. Mrs. Sullivan, do you consent to us using your calls as evidence? I nodded. Every word. Rodriguez smiled grimly. Good. Because in about 24 hours, Victoria and Kevin are going to find out what real consequences look like. That evening, as the sun dipped below the skyline, Harrison poured 2 glasses of water and handed me one like it was champagne. To Operation Justice, he toasted. I raised my glass. To pawns becoming queens. But as I lay back in the motel that night, yes, still the sunset in, for now the victory felt sharper than wine. Because power is intoxicating, honey, but it also makes you see more clearly. And clearly, I saw the storm brewing. Victoria wouldn't go quietly. Kevin wouldn't either. People like them never do. They'd scratch, claw, and scheme. They'd try to turn the tide back in their favor. But now? Now I had allies. The law, the truth. And the one thing they never expected me to use, my voice. So tell me, if you were in my shoes facing a daughter-in-law who just watched her empire collapse in real time, would you pity her tears? Or would you do exactly what I did? Raise a glass to her downfall and whisper, watch me. Because, honey, this was only the beginning. Justice doesn't always knock politely, honey. Sometimes it kicks the door open at 8:30 p.m. while you're twirling pasta in a fancy restaurant, convinced the world still belongs to you. That's exactly how Victoria's mask finally cracked. At 8:30 sharp, Detective Rodriguez texted Harrison one word. Done. Victoria had been dining at Leonard's, a place where entrees start at $65 and the waiters wear gloves. She was halfway through bragging to friends about her inheritance when the police walked in. Witnesses later told me she went pale as marble. Victoria Sullivan Hayes, Rodriguez said, badge flashing under the restaurant's soft lights. You're under arrest for elder abuse, financial fraud, and conspiracy to commit forgery. They cuffed her right there between the linguine and the tiramisu. Apparently she screamed about false arrest, about her powerful lawyer. Only problem? Kevin's golf buddy, the so-called lawyer, had zero experience in criminal law. The spectacle made the front page by morning. But that night, it made me smile into my pillow at the Sunset Inn. Kevin didn't escape either. At 9:15 a.m., the next morning, the detectives picked him up at his office downtown. Securities fraud, forgery, conspiracy. His co-workers watched him let out in cuffs, his $2,000 suit wrinkled by steel bracelets. By noon, their world had collapsed. Bail was set at $50,000 for Victoria, $200,000 for Kevin. And guess what? Every one of their accounts was frozen. Suddenly, the couple who threw me out like garbage couldn't even pay their own way out of jail. 2 days later, at 10:07 a.m., the knock came at Harrison's office door. It wasn't the police this time. It was Eleanor Hayes, Kevin's mother. Imagine pearls, diamonds, and enough hairspray to withstand a hurricane. Eleanor swept into the room like she owned the place. She didn't bother to shake my hand. Margaret, she began, her tone dripping with aristocratic disdain. We need to discuss this situation rationally. I almost laughed. Rational? After her son helped forge documents and evict me from my own home? But I let her talk. Kevin made some poor choices, she said, smoothing her designer skirt. But prosecuting him is vindictive. This entire matter could be resolved quietly. I raised an eyebrow. Quietly? He stole my inheritance. She waved a manicured hand. Exaggerations. Kevin followed Victoria's lead. He didn't understand the full context. I leaned back, folding my arms. Mrs. Hayes, your son created forged legal papers. That's not context. That's crime. Eleanor shifted tactics. We're prepared to compensate you, $2 million, in exchange for dropping the charges. I nearly choked on my coffee. $2 million. A fraction of the 33 million Robert had left me. A fraction of the dignity they tried to strip away. 2 million? I repeated, savoring the absurdity. You think my humiliation is worth a discounted settlement? Her lips tightened. 5 million, final offer. Take it, and we avoid a messy trial. Harrison's eyes met mine across the desk. He didn't need to speak. We were both thinking the same thing. Operation Justice doesn't settle. My answer, I said clearly, is no. Eleanor's mask slipped then. She leaned forward, voice dropping to a hiss. You're destroying multiple families over money you don't even know how to manage. Justice? You don't understand what real power looks like. I smiled, sharp as glass. On the contrary, Mrs. Hayes, I've never understood it more clearly. That was when she revealed her trump card. Kevin's legal team has uncovered irregularities in Robert's business dealings, payments, partnerships. It would be unfortunate if those became public during trial. A threat, thinly veiled, but a threat nonetheless. She wanted me to fear losing Robert's reputation, to cave before the storm. I leaned in. Let me make something clear. You can smear Robert all you like. He's gone. But me? I'm very much alive. And I'll fight this until your son is behind bars where he belongs. Eleanor's smile returned, brittle as porcelain. We'll see, Margaret. We'll see. After she swept out, Harrison exhaled heavily. That woman is dangerous. She's disparity, I corrected. And desperation always reveals cracks. Still, her words gnawed at me. Robert's business dealings, payments, partnerships. Was it possible there were skeletons I didn't know about? I stared at the folder of documents on Harrison's desk, my mind spinning. Margaret, he said softly, sometimes the past is better left alone, but I wasn't sure anymore. That night, lying awake at the Sunset Inn at exactly 11:59 p.m., I whispered into the dark again. Robert, what did you hide from me? Because, honey, victories are sweet, but shadows lengthen when you least expect them. And Eleanor had just reminded me, this war wasn't over. Not by a long shot. Justice tastes sweet, honey, but sometimes it has a bitter aftertaste. After Eleanor Hayes stormed out of Harrison's office with her pearls rattling like sabers, her words clung to me like smoke. Robert's business dealings. I'd spent 43 years believing my husband was meticulous, honest, maybe a little old-fashioned, but never corrupt. And yet, the idea had been planted. Seeds of doubt take root quickly in a widow's heart. The next morning, at 8:15 a.m., I called Harrison. I want to know everything about Robert's finances. Every deal, every partnership, no secrets. He hesitated. Margaret, are you sure? Sometimes. Spare me, I snapped. Secrets are what got us here. By 9:40 a.m., a private investigator was seated in Robert's old study, now my study surrounded by neat rows of labeled folders. Her name was Carol Chen. Sharp-eyed, quick-tongued, the kind of woman who could find rot in marble. By noon, Carol had stacks of documents laid out like puzzle pieces. She tapped one sheet with her pen. Consulting fees, $500,000 to a shell company with no employees. Another tap. Partnership contracts with businesses that don't exist. Another. Invoices tied to known fronts for organized crime. My throat tightened. What are you saying? She looked me dead in the eye. Mrs. Sullivan, your husband was laundering money, millions, for over a decade. The room spun. I grabbed the edge of Robert's oak desk, the one he'd polished every Sunday afternoon, and tried to breathe. No, I whispered. Robert was stubborn, controlling maybe, but not criminal. Carol spread more documents in front of me. Wire transfers. Payment schedules that lined up perfectly with known mob operations. Consulting contracts signed in Robert's steady hand. The evidence is overwhelming, she said quietly. He was part of a laundering pipeline for the Torino crime family. He hid it well, but the money trail doesn't lie. I sat there until the clock struck 1:27 p.m., staring at papers that recast my husband as a stranger. The man who'd bought me roses every anniversary had also bought legitimacy for criminals. Carol's voice was steady but grim. Here's the bigger problem. The $10 million Robert earmarked for Victoria's trust? It came straight from laundered funds. If the FBI uncovers this, they'll seize everything. House, accounts, assets. You could lose it all. That night at 10:14 p.m., the phone rang. Victoria. I almost didn't answer. But curiosity is a cruel mistress. Her voice was sharp, urgent. Mom, we need to talk. About Dad. I stayed silent. You've discovered it, haven't you? The laundering, the shell companies, the dirty money. My heart stopped. How did she know? Kevin found the patterns months ago, she continued. He wanted to protect the family. That's why we acted. We weren't stealing from you. We were saving you from losing everything to the feds. The audacity was staggering. Saving me? I said coldly. By forging documents? By throwing me out of my own home? You don't understand, she cried. Kevin's lawyers have already contacted the FBI. If we cooperate, we get immunity. They're offering a deal. You keep the house, $5 million in clean assets, and the rest goes to the government. Everyone walks away. I gripped the phone until my knuckles whitened. And you? She hesitated. The fraud charges disappear. Kevin clears his record. We start over. For a moment, I couldn't speak. The woman who'd called me extra mouths to feed was now pitching a settlement built on my dead husband's crimes. You expect me to help you profit from your felonies? I asked. No, she said quickly. I expect you to be practical. If you don't cooperate, the FBI takes everything. You'll be left with nothing, maybe even implicated. Think about it, Mom. $5 million is better than prison. After I hung up, I sat in the silence of Robert's study. His scent still lingered in the leather chair. His voice still echoed in my memory, but now it was all stained. I whispered into the dark. Who were you, Robert? At 11:53 p.m., I called Carol back. How soon can you set a meeting with the FBI? As soon as you're ready, she said. Then tomorrow. If they think I'll let my daughter negotiate immunity on the back of my husband's sins, they're dead wrong. Here's the thing, honey. Betrayal doesn't just come from the living. Sometimes it rises from the grave, wrapped in paperwork and dollar signs. And just when you think you've won, the ground shifts again. That night, I realized something chilling. Victoria hadn't underestimated me because I was weak. She'd underestimated me because she thought I'd rather cling to Robert's shadow than face the truth. But she was wrong. Because pawns don't just move forward blindly. They see the whole board. And I was done pretending my board wasn't bloodstained. So tell me, if you discovered your dead husband had been laundering millions for criminals, would you bury the truth to protect his memory? Or would you do what I did, pick up the phone, call the FBI and say, deal me in? Because, honey, sometimes justice requires burning the whole game down. By 9 a.m., sharp the next morning, I was sitting in a gray-walled conference room across from Special Agent Sarah Martinez of the FBI. If you've ever wondered what authority looks like, honey, it's a woman in her 40s with steel in her eyes and zero time for lies. She flipped open a folder thicker than a church hymnal. Mrs. Sullivan, by coming forward, you're admitting your late husband may have engaged in financial crimes. Do you understand the risk? I nodded. I understand. But I also understand something else. My daughter and her husband are planning to use his crimes to blackmail their way out of fraud charges. I won't let them. Martinez studied me for a moment, then leaned forward. Would you be willing to wear a wire? By 7:45 p.m. that evening, I was back in my living room, the same living room Victoria had once declared hers. A slim recorder was taped beneath my blouse, its tiny red light blinking like a heartbeat. Every muscle in my body screamed with nerves, but my voice was steady when the knock came at exactly 8. Victoria swept in first, her mascara doing a poor job of hiding exhaustion. Kevin followed, briefcase in hand, his tie askew like a man juggling too many lies at once. Mom, Victoria said with forced warmth, you look better. I smiled. Clarity has that effect. Kevin set the briefcase on the coffee table and snapped it open with the confidence of a man who thought he was sealing a deal, not signing his own indictment. Margaret, he began, our lawyers have structured this very favorably. You retain the house, $5 million in clean assets, and immunity from any charges tied to Robert's activities. All you have to do is sign. I leaned forward, pretending to study the documents. Clean assets. That's an interesting phrase. Tell me, Kevin, when exactly did you discover Robert's laundering? He froze for a fraction of a second. Just long enough. Was it before you forged the will? I pressed. Or after you threw me out of my own house? Margaret, he said carefully, that's irrelevant. Actually, I said, my voice sharp as glass, it's very relevant. Because if you knew and said nothing, that makes you an accessory. And if you only discovered it while committing your own crimes, that makes you unlucky. Either way, you're guilty. Victoria's composure cracked. Mom, please, this isn't the time. Oh, it's exactly the time, I cut in. Because right now, every word you say is being recorded. Kevin's eyes darted to the recorder under my blouse, though he couldn't see it. Recorded? What are you talking about? I smiled. Agent Martinez finds this conversation very interesting. The color drained from both their faces. Agent what? Victoria whispered. Right on cue, the front door opened, and Agent Martinez strode in with two other agents, badges flashing, guns holstered but ready. Victoria Sullivan Hayes, Kevin Hayes. You're under arrest for conspiracy to commit wire fraud, elder abuse, and attempted extortion of a federal witness. Victoria turned to me, eyes wide with betrayal. Mom, how could you? I stood, shoulders squared. The same way you could forge documents and kick me out of my house. Except my way is legal. Kevin lunged for the briefcase, but one of the agents pinned him down in seconds. The documents, his so-called deal, were confiscated, along with both their phones. Martinez read them their rights as they sat frozen in disbelief. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law. Even in cuffs, Kevin tried one last card. Margaret, you don't know what you're doing. Robert's connections, the Torino family, they won't take kindly to this level of federal attention. You've put yourself in danger. Martinez didn't flinch. Mr. Hayes, are you threatening a federal witness? Kevin stammered. I'm warning her. Good, Martinez said crisply. We'll add witness intimidation to the list. When the door finally closed behind them, silence filled the house. For the first time in months, it felt like my home again. Martinez turned to me, her expression softening just slightly. Mrs. Sullivan, you should know something. Your husband wasn't just laundering money. He was also an FBI informant. For 12 years, he worked with us undercover, helping dismantle the Torino operation. The world tilted sideways. Robert, an informant? She nodded. The money he left you isn't tainted. It was compensation for his cooperation. It's clean. It's yours. I sank into Robert's old chair, tears stinging my eyes. For weeks I'd doubted him, cursed his memory. Now I realized he hadn't betrayed me. He'd protected me even after death. Martinez rested a hand on the file. Your daughter didn't just lose her inheritance. She tried to weaponize lies against the truth. And in the end, truth won. I exhaled, long and steady. The irony, I murmured, is almost poetic. Here's the thing, honey. Sometimes the game looks lost. Sometimes your enemies seem 2 steps ahead. But pawns that cross the board don't just survive, they change the game entirely. And last night, as those handcuffs clicked shut on my daughter and her husband, I realized I wasn't just a pawn anymore. I was the queen. So tell me, if you had one chance to wear a wire and watch betrayal implode in real time, would you take it? Or would you let them win, just to keep the peace? Because, honey, peace built on lies isn't peace at all. It's surrender. And I don't surrender. 6 months. That's how long it took to turn from a widow in a $49 a night motel to a woman whose story made headlines, honey. 6 months, and I was no longer the discarded mother-in-law. I was the woman who outplayed them all. By 7:30 a.m. each morning, sunlight streamed through the new bay windows I had installed myself. Windows that actually opened, unlike the drafty ones Robert had sworn he'd fix someday. My kitchen gleamed with countertops I chose, not ones I tolerated. Every corner of the house whispered a truth Victoria never understood. This was my home. Always had been. And now, it was secure, legally, financially, morally. Victoria and Kevin? They weren't sipping wine at Leonard's anymore. They were serving 18-month federal sentences. Fraud, elder abuse, forgery, attempted extortion, even witness intimidation, courtesy of Kevin's big mouth. Every few weeks, I received letters from Victoria. At first, they were indignant protests of innocence, rambling excuses. Then came apologies, dripping with desperation. Mom, please forgive me. Mom, I was misguided. Mom, I just wanted security. I read the first few, then I stopped. Because forgiveness isn't a free pass handed out like candy. Forgiveness is earned. And Victoria hadn't even begun. At 10:05 a.m., one Tuesday, Harrison stopped by with updates. He grinned as he slid the final court order across my dining table. Congratulations, Margaret. Every asset is officially yours. The investigation into Robert's undercover work is closed. The FBI has confirmed the money is clean. You're free. Free. That word tasted better than champagne. I raised my coffee mug instead. To Operation Justice. Harrison chuckled. To queens who never surrender. But I didn't just sit on that 33 million like a dragon on gold. At 11:45 a.m., I stood in front of the Margaret Sullivan Foundation for Elder Protection, a ribbon in my hand and TV cameras in my face. We'd already funded legal aid for seniors tricked or abused by their families. We'd launched a scholarship program for grandchildren willing to care for their elders instead of exploiting them. The applause that morning wasn't just for me, it was for every invisible woman over 60 who'd ever been told she was just extra mouths to feed. One reporter asked, "Mrs. Sullivan, do you regret pressing charges against your own daughter?" I smiled, steady and sharp. Family protects you when you're vulnerable. DNA exploits you. I chose justice over DNA, and I don't regret a thing. That line made the evening news. Some called me harsh, others called me a hero, but no one called me invisible anymore. At 8 p.m. that same night, I sat in my new art studio, the room Victoria had planned to gut for a wine cellar. Brushes and paints covered the table. Canvases lined the walls. For the first time in decades, I painted myself. Not the grieving widow, not the obedient wife, not the cast-aside mother. On the canvas, a woman stood tall in sunlight, her face lifted, her hands steady. A queen, not a pawn. 2 weeks later, Sarah Chen, the sister of my investigator, now my financial advisor, brought quarterly reports. "Your portfolio's thriving," she said, handing me the file. "The foundation is fully funded. Netflix is still moving forward with the documentary. They're calling it The Mother's Revenge, an American crime story." I almost laughed. Revenge. I didn't see it that way. I hadn't sought to destroy my daughter. I'd simply refused to be destroyed. But if people found empowerment in my story, so be it. At 7:05 a.m., one morning, the doorbell rang. Through the window, I saw Victoria released on parole, standing in yesterday's clothes, her face older by 10 years. "Mom, please," she whispered when I opened the door, but did not invite her in. "I've lost everything. My marriage, my reputation. My children barely look at me. I need forgiveness." I studied her for a long moment. Then I said quietly, "Forgiveness doesn't erase consequences. You wrote your story when you told me I was useless. I rewrote mine when I refused to believe you." Her eyes filled with tears. "So that's it? You'll never forgive me?" I sighed. "Victoria, forgiveness is possible, but reconciliation? That's dead. And some graves don't need tending." I closed the door. This time, it stayed shut. Here's the thing, honey. Victory isn't just measured in courtrooms or bank accounts. It's measured in dignity reclaimed, in mornings where you drink coffee in peace, in nights where you sleep under your own roof without fear. I was no longer the woman packing 2 suitcases under the watchful eye of a smirking daughter-in-law. I was the woman who outplayed them all, who turned betrayal into a platform, who proved pawns don't stay pawns. So tell me, if you were me, if your own child or child-in-law tried to erase you from your own life, would you forgive and forget? Or would you do what I did? Rise, rebuild, and remind them that the best revenge isn't getting even. It's becoming everything they swore you'd never be.